The hallways of the Westfield Chess Club gleamed under soft lighting as Rosa Mendez moved quietly from room to room. It was nearly 8 p.m., and most of the wealthy club members were gathered in the main hall, their voices rising and falling like waves as they played their evening games. Rosa kept her eyes down, pushing her cleaning cart carefully to avoid disturbing anyone. At 45, Rosa's face showed the lines of a hard life. Her hands, once soft and nimble, had grown calloused from years of scrubbing floors and wiping windows. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, with a few gray strands escaping around her temples. She wore the blue uniform of the cleaning staff, a little too big for her small frame, but clean and pressed despite its age. Rosa had been cleaning at the chess club for 3 years now. Before that, she had worked at hotels, restaurants, and office buildings across the city. But this job was different. Here, among the polished wooden tables and expensive chess sets, she found herself drawn to the game that filled the room with silent tension and occasional bursts of excitement. Knight at f3, a balding man announced to his opponent, his gold watch catching the light as he moved the piece. Rosa glanced up briefly as she emptied a nearby trash can. She recognized the opening move, one she had seen many times before. Back home in her tiny apartment, a chessboard waited for her. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cardboard board and plastic pieces she had salvaged from the club's dumpster when they upgraded their teaching sets. The board had a water stain in one corner, and she was missing a white pawn, replaced by a button that was roughly the same size. Every night after her shift, Rosa would sit at her kitchen table, replaying the games she had seen at the club. She would move both the black and white pieces, trying to understand why one player had made a certain move, or how a particular strategy had led to victory. Sometimes she'd stay up until 2 a.m., lost in the world of knights and pawns, completely forgetting her aching back and tired feet. Her love for chess had begun in childhood, back in her home country. Her father, a carpenter with rough hands but a gentle heart, had taught her the rules when she was just 6 years old. They couldn't afford a proper chess set, so he had carved the pieces himself from scraps of wood. Those pieces were long gone now, left behind when Rosa had to leave her country in a hurry 15 years ago, but the lessons remained. "Excuse me," a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Rosa looked up to see an older gentleman frowning at her. "You're blocking the way." "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, quickly pulling her cart aside. The man walked past without acknowledging her apology, as if she were just another piece of furniture in the room. This was how it always was. The members looked through her, not at her. On rare occasions, someone might thank her for refilling their water or picking up a dropped napkin, but most of the time, she might as well have been invisible. As Rosa moved to the next room, she paused near a game between two young men. One was clearly winning, but his opponent didn't see the trap that was being set. Rosa's fingers twitched slightly as she resisted the urge to point out the coming checkmate in 3 moves. Instead, she turned away and continued with her work, wiping down empty tables and straightening chairs. The club would be open for another 2 hours. After that, when everyone had gone home, Rosa would sometimes sit at one of the expensive tables and move the pieces on the demonstration board, recreating famous games she had read about in chess books borrowed from the public library. No one at the club knew about her passion. Why would they? To them, she was just the cleaning lady, the woman with the worn shoes and heavily accented English. They never imagined that behind her quiet exterior was a mind that could calculate multiple moves ahead, that could recognize patterns and strategies that many of them struggled to understand. But Rosa didn't mind. Chess had taught her patience. Like in the game, sometimes you had to wait for the right moment to reveal your true strength. And until that moment came, she was content to watch, learn, and play in the solitude of her small apartment, with only the pieces as her companions. Friday nights were always the busiest at the Westfield Chess Club. That's when the younger members would come in, talking loudly and sometimes bringing expensive drinks that the club manager pretended not to notice. Rosa didn't mind the extra work. The messier they were, the more hours she could claim on her timesheet. This particular Friday, the main room was packed. In the center sat Thomas Harrington, the state chess champion for 3 years running. With his designer clothes and perfectly styled hair, he looked more like a movie star than a chess player. A small crowd had gathered around his table, watching as he easily defeated opponent after opponent. "Another round," Thomas called out, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile. His friends laughed and clapped him on the back. Someone opened another bottle of champagne, and the sweet smell filled the air as Rosa quietly moved around the edges of the room, collecting empty glasses and wiping spills. "Who's next?" Thomas asked, surveying the room. "Come on, give me a real challenge." Most of the members had already played against him and lost. They shifted uncomfortably, no one wanting to be the next victim of Thomas's brutal playing style. He was known for dismantling his opponents and then explaining exactly how and why they had failed, a public lesson in humiliation that few wanted to experience twice. Rosa kept her head down as she moved closer to Thomas's table. She needed to clean up a spill before someone slipped on it. As she bent down with her cloth, her elbow accidentally bumped the edge of the chess table. The Black Queen toppled over with a soft thud. The room went silent. Well, Thomas said, turning slowly to look at Rosa. His eyes were slightly unfocused from drinking, but his voice was sharp. "Looks like someone doesn't know how to respect the game." "I'm sorry, sir," Rosa said quietly, quickly righting the fallen piece. "It was an accident." Thomas's gaze lingered on her face, then traveled down to her worn uniform with the faded name tag. A slow smile spread across his lips, not a kind one, but the sort of smile that made Rosa's stomach tighten with unease. "You know what that is?" he asked, picking up the Black Queen and holding it in front of Rosa's face. Rosa kept her eyes lowered. "It's a queen, sir." A murmur of surprise rippled through the watching crowd. They hadn't expected the cleaning lady to know the names of the pieces. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And do you know how it moves?" Rosa hesitated. Something told her to play dumb, to apologize again and move away. But a deeper part of her, the part that stayed up late playing chess against herself, couldn't bring herself to pretend ignorance. "It moves in any direction, as many squares as it wants," she said softly. "It's the most powerful piece on the board." Thomas's smile widened. He glanced at his friends, who were now watching with amused interest. The alcohol had made them hungry for entertainment, and Rosa suddenly realized she had become their target for the night. "The cleaning lady knows chess," Thomas announced loudly. "Isn't that fascinating?" A few people chuckled. Someone made a comment Rosa couldn't quite hear, but it made several others laugh harder. "I have a wonderful idea," Thomas said, standing up and making a grand gesture toward the empty chair across from him. "Why don't you play a game with me?" Rosa clutched her cleaning cloth tighter. "I'm working, sir. I should finish." "Oh, I'm sure your boss won't mind." Thomas interrupted, looking around the room. "Will he, everyone? After all, we're paying customers, and we want to see the cleaning lady play chess." More laughter filled the room. Rosa felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She knew they weren't inviting her to play because they respected her. They wanted to mock her, to watch her fumble with the pieces for their amusement. "I really should get back to work," she tried again. "I insist," Thomas said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Unless you're afraid. Perhaps you only know the names of the pieces but not how to actually play." The challenge hung in the air. Rosa felt trapped, with curious and mocking eyes on her from every corner of the room. Just as she was about to refuse again, an older voice spoke up from the back. "Let her play if she wants to." The crowd parted slightly to reveal Dr. Wei, one of the oldest members of the club. With his gentle eyes behind thick glasses, he had always been one of the few who actually acknowledged Rosa's existence, sometimes nodding to her or saying thank you. "If the lady knows chess," Dr. Wei continued calmly, "perhaps she deserves a chance to show it." The room fell silent as all eyes moved between Dr. Wei and Rosa. She stood frozen, her cleaning cloth twisted tightly in her hands. The club manager stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "Dr. Wei, I don't think this is appropriate. Mrs. Mendez has work to finish and—" "I'll take responsibility," Dr. Wei said calmly, "and I'm sure the floors can wait for 20 minutes. Rosa looked at Dr. Wei, surprised by his support. His kind eyes met hers, and he gave her a small nod. She then glanced around the room at the curious faces watching her. Some looked amused, others uncomfortable, but all were waiting to see what she would do. Thomas drummed his fingers on the table impatiently. "Well? Are you going to play or not?" Some of us don't have all night. Something stirred inside Rosa's chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was pride, mixed with a touch of anger. For 3 years, she had cleaned around these people while they ignored her. She had listened to their conversations, learned from watching their games, all while being treated as if she were invisible. And now, this young man wanted to use her as entertainment for his friends. He expected her to embarrass herself to give him and his friends something to laugh about. Rosa thought of her father and how he would react in this situation. He had always told her, never let anyone make you feel small because of who you are or what you do. Your worth isn't in your job or your money, it's in here. He would tap her head and then her heart. Slowly, Rosa placed her cleaning supplies on a nearby table. She untied the small apron around her waist and folded it neatly. 20 minutes, she said to the club manager. I will make up the time at the end of my shift. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Thomas's smirk widened as Rosa approached the table. This should be entertaining, someone whispered too loudly. Rosa pulled out the chair across from Thomas and sat down. The expensive chess set between them had pieces made of polished stone. She had cleaned these sets many times but had never touched them while anyone was watching. White or black? Thomas asked with exaggerated politeness. You choose, Rosa replied quietly. Such generosity, Thomas said with a laugh. I'll take white, of course. First advantage and all that. He spun the board so the white pieces were on his side. As Thomas arranged his pieces with practiced hands, Rosa felt oddly calm. The nervousness that had gripped her moments ago was fading. This was just chess, the game she played every night in her tiny apartment. The game her father had taught her when she was just a little girl sitting on his knee. Do you know how all the pieces move? Thomas asked loudly, as if speaking to a child. The pawns go forward one space at a time, except. I know how to play, Rosa interrupted softly. Thomas raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. Don't say I didn't try to help. From the corner of her eye, Rosa could see people pulling out their phones. They were getting ready to record what they thought would be her humiliation. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her black pieces in their starting positions. Dr. Wei had pulled up a chair nearby. His presence gave Rosa a small measure of comfort. At least one person in the room didn't see her as a joke. Standard rules, Thomas announced. 10-second touch rule in effect. He adjusted his expensive watch and looked at Rosa with a challenging smile. Clock or no clock? No clock, Rosa said. She hadn't played with a chess clock in years. Fine by me. I doubt we'll need it anyway. Thomas cracked his knuckles dramatically. Let's see what you've got, cleaning lady. Rosa took a deep breath. Part of her still wanted to stand up and walk away, to go back to being invisible. It would be safer. But another part, the part that had been silent for too long, wanted to stay. As Thomas reached for his king's pawn to make the first move, Rosa looked down at the black pieces in front of her. They seemed to welcome her, like old friends she hadn't seen in a long time. Whatever happened next, she had made her choice, she would play. Thomas moved his king's pawn forward 2 spaces with a flourish, the classic opening move. His friends watched with amused smiles, drinks in hand, ready for the show they expected would follow. Your turn, Thomas said, gesturing to the board with an exaggerated sweep of his hand. Rosa looked at the board, taking in the familiar pattern. She had seen this opening hundreds of times. Without hesitation, she reached for her king's pawn and moved it forward to meet Thomas's in the center of the board. Mirror opening, Thomas commented with a smirk. Beginner's move. Someone snickered in the background. Rosa kept her eyes on the board, her face calm. Thomas quickly developed his knight, bringing it to f3, another common move. When Rosa responded by developing her own knight to f6, matching him once again, he gave a theatrical sigh. Aren't you just going to copy everything I do? That's not really playing chess, you know. Rosa said nothing, her fingers lingering for a moment on her knight. There was something in her touch, a comfort, a familiarity, that made Dr. Wei lean forward slightly in his chair. The game continued for several more moves, with Thomas playing aggressive, forward-pushing moves typical of his flashy style. He brought out his bishop, then his queen, setting up for a quick attack. All standard moves that Rosa recognized immediately. On her fifth move, instead of continuing to mirror Thomas, Rosa did something unexpected. She moved her queen's bishop to a position that seemed to leave it vulnerable. A small frown appeared on Thomas's face as he studied the move. "Interesting choice," he said, his voice losing some of its mocking tone. He captured her bishop with his knight. But a mistake. Rosa accepted the loss without any change in expression. When she moved her queen diagonally across the board in response, Thomas's frown deepened. "Check," Rosa said quietly. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Thomas hadn't seen the check coming. He quickly moved his king out of danger, but Rosa could see the slight twitch in his jaw. He wasn't smiling anymore. The rhythm of the game changed. Thomas took longer between moves, his fingers hovering over pieces before committing to his choices. Rosa, by contrast, played with quiet confidence, each move flowing naturally from the one before. People who had been chatting or looking at their phones were now watching intently. Someone whispered, "Who is this woman?" After 15 moves, the board had transformed. Thomas's aggressive opening had left gaps in his defense, and Rosa's pieces were positioned strategically across the board, supporting each other in ways that weren't immediately obvious to casual observers. Dr. Wei, however, saw it clearly. His eyes widened behind his glasses as he recognized the pattern emerging. It was the Zaitsev variation of the Ruy Lopez, a complex strategy usually employed by experienced players. Thomas wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. The champagne buzz was wearing off, replaced by growing concern. He moved his rook to capture one of Rosa's pawns, trying to regain some advantage. Rosa didn't hesitate. She moved her knight to a position that threatened both Thomas's queen and created a discovered attack on his king. "Check," she said again, her voice still soft but somehow filling the now silent room. Thomas stared at the board in disbelief. He moved his king to safety, but had to leave his queen vulnerable. Rosa took it with her knight. "This isn't possible," Thomas muttered, his face flushing red. "You're just getting lucky." But luck had nothing to do with it. Rosa's pieces moved across the board like dancers in a choreographed performance, each move setting up the next three. Her face remained calm, but her eyes had come alive, shining with a quiet intensity that transformed her entire appearance. The club manager had stopped pretending to work and was now openly watching. Even the bartender had paused in his duties, a half-polished glass forgotten in his hand. Thomas made another move, trying to regain control of the center of the board. But Rosa had anticipated it. She brought her remaining bishop into play, creating a pin against Thomas's king. "She's playing like a master," Dr. Wei whispered to himself, a smile spreading across his face. Thomas heard the comment and shot Dr. Wei an angry look. When he turned back to the board, Rosa had moved her queen to 3. The crowd gasped. Even those with limited chess knowledge could see what was happening. Thomas's king was suddenly surrounded, with nowhere to go. "Check," Rosa said for the third time. But now there was a new word that followed, mate in 2. Thomas stared at the board in disbelief, his face draining of color. "That's not possible," he muttered, leaning forward to study the positions more carefully. The crowd had grown, with nearly everyone in the club now gathered around their table. "Mate in 2. Someone repeated. "Is she serious?" Thomas's eyes darted across the board, calculating desperately. Rosa sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, watching him work through the inevitable conclusion. There was no escape, just as she had said, his king would be checkmated in 2 moves no matter what he did now. "I don't believe this," Thomas said, louder this time. He looked up at Rosa, his eyes narrowing. "Who taught you to play like this?" Rosa met his gaze steadily. "My father," she answered simply. "Your father?" Thomas scoffed. "And who exactly was your father? Garry Kasparov?" A small, sad smile touched Rosa's lips. "No, he was a carpenter named Miguel Mendez, but he loved chess more than anything except his family." Dr. Wei leaned forward. "Your father wasn't by any chance from the town of San Juan de Mora, was he?" Rosa turned to him, surprised. "Yes. How did you know?" A look of wonder crossed Dr. Wei's face. "Miguel Mendez? I've heard that name. There was a carpenter from that region who played in amateur tournaments in the 1980s. He was known for his unique approach to the Zaitsev variation." He gestured to the board. "Just like what you've shown us tonight." Whispers spread through the crowd. Someone in the back was quickly typing on their phone, searching for information. He's right, the person called out after a moment. There are old tournament records. Miguel Mendez, never a grandmaster, but he beat several professionals in his day. Known as the carpenter's mate for his woodworking skills and his unique endgame techniques. Rosa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That was my papa, she said softly. He never had formal training, but he studied the game all his life. Thomas pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. You expect us to believe that you're some kind of chess prodigy who just happens to be cleaning our floors. Why would you be doing that if you could play like this? Life doesn't always give us choices, Rosa replied, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. When we came to this country, my father was already sick. There was no money for tournaments or chess clubs. After he died, I needed work, not games. The room fell silent. Even Thomas seemed to have no response to that. Dr. Y broke the silence. Would you show us? He asked Rosa gently. The mate in two that you mentioned. Rosa nodded and turned back to the board. With calm precision, she moved her rook to f1, placing Thomas's king in check again. Check, she said. Thomas had only one legal move, to block with his knight. He made the move without comment, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Rosa then slid her bishop diagonally across the board. Checkmate, she said quietly. The room erupted in spontaneous applause. Even those who had been laughing at Rosa earlier were now looking at her with newfound respect. Phones were recording the moment, and someone took a picture of the final board position. Thomas sat frozen, staring at his defeated king. His friends stood awkwardly behind him, no longer laughing or making jokes. After a long moment, he looked up at Rosa. Where did you learn that sequence? He asked, his voice both humbled and genuinely curious. I studied the games of José Raul Capablanca, Rosa answered. My father had an old book of his matches. We read it so many times the pages fell apart. Dr. Wayne nodded appreciatively. Capablanca's influence is clear in your play. The economy of movement, the patience. An older club member who had been watching silently stepped forward. Young lady, that was one of the most beautiful games I've seen played in this club for many years. The club manager approached, looking both embarrassed and impressed. Mrs. Mendez, I had no idea. You never mentioned. You never asked, Rosa said simply, with no bitterness in her voice. As the excitement continued around her, Rosa began to reset the pieces on the board, lining them up carefully in their starting positions. Her hands moved with the same care she used when cleaning, methodical, respectful, thorough. Thomas watched her. The shock on his face had been replaced by something else, a mixture of embarrassment and reluctant admiration. Finally, he extended his hand across the table. Good game, he said. Rosa looked at his offered hand for a moment before taking it. Thank you, she replied. You play well too, very aggressive in the opening. But careless in the middle game, Thomas admitted with a rueful smile. My coach keeps telling me that. News of Rosa's unexpected victory spread through the chess club like wildfire. Members who had left early were calling friends who were still there, trying to confirm if the rumors were true. Had the cleaning lady really defeated Thomas Harrington, the state champion, in less than 30 moves? By the time Rosa finished resetting the board, a small crowd had formed around her. People who had never given her a second glance were now eager to introduce themselves. Would you play another game? Someone asked. I can offer you a proper challenge, said another. Rosa looked at the clock on the wall. I'm sorry, but I need to finish my work. My shift ends in an hour. The club manager stepped forward, looking slightly embarrassed. Don't worry about that tonight, Mrs. Mendez. Consider yourself off duty. Rosa hesitated. For 3 years, she had followed the same routine, clean the rooms, empty the trash, wipe down the tables, and go home to her empty apartment. The idea of staying and playing chess felt strange, almost wrong. This wasn't her world. Dr. Wei seemed to sense her discomfort. Perhaps just one more game tonight, he suggested gently. It's getting late, and I'm sure Mrs. Mendez would like to rest. Rosa gave him a grateful look. One more game would be nice. To everyone's surprise, it was Thomas who spoke up next. Would you play against me again? He asked. The arrogance was gone from his voice. "I'd like a chance to learn from my mistakes." A hush fell over the room. No one had expected Thomas, known for his enormous ego, to ask for a rematch so quickly after being defeated, especially not against someone he had initially mocked. Rosa studied his face, looking for signs of the earlier mockery, but found none. "All right," she agreed. "One more game." As they set up the board, Thomas spoke quietly so only Rosa could hear. "I'm sorry about before. I was being a jerk." Rosa nodded but said nothing as she arranged her pieces. This time, Thomas offered her the white pieces. The room grew quiet as Rosa made her opening move, pawn to e4, classic and straightforward. The game that followed was different from the first. Both players took their time, thinking through each move carefully. Thomas played more defensively, clearly having learned from his earlier defeat. Around them, club members watched in respectful silence. Some took notes. Others recorded the game on their phones. Even the bartender had abandoned his post to get a better view. 40 minutes later, the game reached a critical point. Thomas had played admirably, avoiding the traps Rosa had set and creating a complex middle game. But Rosa's experience showed in her patience. She waited for the right moment, then sacrificed her knight to break open Thomas's kingside defense. 3 moves later, Thomas found himself in a difficult position, not quite checkmate, but close enough that defeat was inevitable. He studied the board for a long moment, then tipped over his king in resignation. "You play beautifully," he said sincerely. "Where did you learn that sacrifice?" Rosa smiled softly. "From my father. He always said sometimes you need to give something up to win something greater." Dr. Wei, who had been watching intently, stepped forward. "Mrs. Mendez, your play reminds me of the great Cuban master Capablanca, economical, precise, and elegant. Have you ever played in tournaments?" Rosa shook her head. "Not since I was a girl. Back in my country, my father would take me to small local competitions, nothing official." "That's a shame," Dr. Wei said thoughtfully. "Talent like yours shouldn't go unrecognized." An older woman who had been watching spoke up. "I'm on the club's board of directors. We should offer Mrs. Mendez a membership." "Oh, I couldn't afford," Rosa began. "An honorary membership," the woman clarified. "And perhaps you might consider giving lessons to some of our newer members." Rosa looked stunned. "Me? Teaching chess?" "Why not?" Thomas said. "You just beat me twice, and I give lessons here every Saturday." The club manager nodded enthusiastically. "We could arrange something, perhaps a few sessions each week. We would pay you, of course." Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed what was happening. Just hours ago, she had been invisible to these people, just the woman who cleaned their messes. Now they were offering her a place among them, a chance to share her knowledge and passion. "I would need to keep my cleaning job," she said practically. "The chess lessons might not be enough to pay my rent." "We can work around your schedule," the manager assured her. Dr. Wei smiled kindly at Rosa. "So what do you say, Mrs. Mendez? Will you join us as a teacher instead of just a cleaner?" Rosa looked around at the faces watching her expectantly. For the first time in years, people were seeing her, really seeing her, not just looking through her as if she didn't exist. 6 months passed like a whirlwind. Rosa's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined that fateful Friday night. She still cleaned at the chess club 3 mornings a week, insisting on keeping the job despite Dr. Wei's protests. "Good work is nothing to be ashamed of," she had told him firmly. But her afternoons and 2 evenings a week were now devoted to teaching chess. At first, only a few curious members signed up for lessons with the cleaning lady champion, as some still called her behind her back. But word spread quickly. Rosa had a gift not just for playing chess, but for explaining it in simple, clear terms that made complex strategies understandable. "Chess is like life," she would tell her students, many of whom were wealthy business people or their children. "Each piece has its own way of moving, its own strengths and weaknesses, just like people. The secret is knowing how they work together." By the 3rd month, her classes were full. By the 4th, there was a waiting list. Today was different, though. Today, Rosa wasn't at the club to clean or to teach. She sat at a table in the main hall, facing her opponent across a tournament-grade chess set. Around them, a crowd had gathered to watch the final round of the city championship. Rosa's fingers hovered over her knight, considering her next move carefully. Across from her sat Li Chen, the top-ranked player in the city for the past 5 years. The game had been going for nearly 2 hours, and neither player had gained a clear advantage. In the front row of spectators stood Dr. Wei, watching intently. Beside him was Thomas, who had become both Rosa's student and her friend over the past months. At first, his friends had teased him mercilessly about taking lessons from the woman who had once cleaned the floors, but Thomas didn't care. Under Rosa's guidance, his game had improved dramatically. "She's going to win," Thomas whispered to Dr. Wei. "Look at how she's positioned her bishops." Dr. Wei nodded slightly. Mr. Chen doesn't see it yet, but he will in about 3 moves. Rosa finally moved her knight, setting up a subtle trap that wouldn't be obvious to anyone not paying extremely close attention. Li Chen studied the board, his expression giving away nothing. As the game progressed, Rosa thought about how much had changed. She now had enough money to move to a slightly bigger apartment. She had bought new clothes, nothing fancy, but no longer just her cleaning uniforms. And most importantly, she had framed a photo of her father and placed it next to her chessboard at home. "I'm making you proud, Papa," she whispered to herself each night before bed. Li Chen finally made his move. Exactly the one Rosa had hoped for. Now the endgame would unfold just as she had planned. With careful precision, she moved her pieces, slowly closing the trap around his king. In the audience, several people began to murmur as they recognized what was happening. Thomas grinned broadly, nudging Dr. Wei with his elbow. 10 minutes later, Li Chen stayed at the board in disbelief before extending his hand across the table. "Beautiful game," he said with genuine respect. "I didn't see your strategy until it was too late." Rosa shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the challenge. You play wonderfully." The tournament director approached with a small trophy and a check. "Congratulations to our new city champion, Rosa Mendez." The crowd erupted in applause. As Rosa accepted the trophy, she spotted a familiar face at the back of the room, the club manager who had once scolded her for talking to members. He gave her a sheepish smile and a thumbs up. Dr. Wei made his way through the crowd to Rosa's side. "Your father would be so proud," he said, patting her shoulder gently. "What will you do with the prize money?" Rosa looked down at the check in her hand. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than she had ever held at once. "First, I will send some to my sister back home," she said thoughtfully. "Then I want to start a chess program for children in my neighborhood, kids who wouldn't normally get to learn the game." "A wonderful idea." Dr. Wei nodded approvingly. "I'd be happy to help if you need it." Thomas joined them, offering Rosa a bottle of water. "So, teacher," he said with a grin, "when do I get my next lesson?" "I still need to learn how you set up that bishop trap in the middle game." Rosa smiled, looking around at the club that had once been just her workplace and was now her community. At the people who had once looked through her and now looked up to her. "Life is strange," she said softly. "Sometimes the most important moves are the ones you never plan to make." She carefully placed the trophy on the table and began to reset the chess pieces, just as she had done countless times before. But now, her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had finally found her rightful place in the world.